So when I was a Christian and I was in the church growing up in it, I kind of leaned on the authority figures around me to understand the world. So I would talk to my parents, my pastors, and even my friends to try to figure out, okay, like what is this thing called life all about? How do I know it's true? How do I know how to know what's true? And there's all these sorts of like philosophic questions that are kind of operating in most of our subconsciouses at all times. And, these are the things that we use, these questions, in order to guide our thinking. And it kind of happens without us being, aware of it. But as I got older, when I turned about 17 or 18, I began to kind of ask these questions a bit more explicitly. So instead of just simply mimicking what people were thinking around me or just taking what they said to be true as true, I kind of thought to myself, well, how is it that you're coming to that conclusion? And how can I come to that conclusion through the same means? Why is it that your way of reaching that conclusion is right? And then that kind of led me into philosophy. But I think there is this idea that I've been running up against when I'm speaking to Christians online and having some interesting conversations, is this idea that reason, which is what I hold to be the faculty that enables us to grasp reality and gain knowledge, and that's what we use to know what's true and what's false. And that's kind of what I hold to be the way we gain knowledge nowadays. On the other hand, when I was a Christian and with the Christians I'm speaking to online, a lot of them say that we reason is just something we assume works, and that and this is just the same as assuming God exists and that He gives us knowledge, for example. And so I've been running into this argument from Christians who are saying that because all worldviews are circular in some sense, and let me explain what that means in a second. That because all worldviews are circular, it means that we don't really have any grounding, basically, and that we are all in the same playing field, and everything we choose to believe is ultimately a matter of faith, even if you claim it isn't. So, for example, a Christian making this argument might come up to me and say, "Oh, Maddox, you're saying that reason is a way of knowing things and knowing what's true. Well, you're just assuming it's a way of knowing things are true. Well, how do you know? Have you proven it to be true?" Now, this is a tricky question that I want to address in a second, later in this video. But on the other hand, I think the Christian says this because they also make the claim, well, I believe in God, and God is who tells me what is good and bad, and so on and so forth. And they too, as many of them have acknowledged to me, that they are just assuming God exists. And they have the Bible, and the Bible says God exists. And then they say, well, the Bible says God exists, and God says the Bible is true in the Bible. And therefore, Christianity is true, right? So this is circular, and the circular reasoning fallacy, which I talked about in another video, is when you assume a premise or an idea to be true, and then you use that to make an argument for why that premise is true, which is basically akin to saying, well, I think this investment property is a good investment because it's a good investment. Or I think the Bible is true because the Bible says it's true. As you can see, these are really bad arguments because you're not really proving, you're not really pointing to facts that show you that idea in the first place is true. You're just assuming it's true and then using that to make a conclusion. And this is fallacious because you're not appealing to what ultimately matters when making an argument, which are observable facts. And this is where I want to get to my point about why I think reason isn't circular. And I want to first try to steelman the argument for why Christians might say using reason to prove reason is circular. So, for example, a Christian making this claim might say, well, you are telling me that reason is a way of knowing things, but the problem is you're using your reason to do that. And as a result, you are assuming reason is valid in a way of gaining knowledge, and you're using it to validate itself. Ergo, therefore, you are committing the circular reasoning fallacy. Now, the problem with this is this tricky use of the word assume. I think when I'm using reason, it is not that I am assuming reason to be true. Let me just trace it back to when we were all just kids and we started developing our ability to look at the world, form concepts and principles, and then use those principles to make deductions. And as we went through that process as children, as we grew up, we didn't sit back and go, yes, I am assuming my reason is valid. No, you just use it. And it is only a later development that when you get older and start philosophizing or thinking more deeply about what reason is and how you even do this thing of gaining knowledge, which is called reasoning, you identify the fact that you are doing this process. And all you're doing is acknowledging a fact. You're not assuming it to be true without any evidence. In fact, you're just using the evidence of your senses that, I'm doing this thing called reasoning, and therefore it's true. And as you can see, this is very different from assuming something is true just because it's written in a book, as opposed to we can see ourselves doing this actively. Another point I want to make about this is even if we deny that we're doing this, and you say, well, it might just be a hallucination that we're gaining all this knowledge. The problem is, even in saying that, you're still assuming that reason is a way of knowing things. So what I mean by that is you're assuming that you still have some sort of way of knowing that you are engaging in a hallucination. And that means you are using something opposed to reason. That's implied in that argument, at least. Or you're using reason itself to do this. But the problem is that even in denying it, you have to use some type of means to achieve this. And if it's not reason, then how are you reaching this conclusion or this assumption that you're just hallucinating? And as you can see, there's really no facts that anybody can point to that tells them we're hallucinating. All we can see is that we can see things, we can look at the facts, and then we can use our mind to reach principles and concepts and then use that to act in the world effectively. So I just wanted to make this point in this video because I think being able to defend reason is vitally important to not only individual sanity, but to being able to, in the long term, gain knowledge and be certain and confident that you have knowledge. And also know that you can act on what you know instead of feeling as if, well, somebody else might be right because, I can't really know how to know. And so defending reason and knowing how to defend it is probably one of the most important tasks we can do for ourselves, because this kind of gives you this deep sense of confidence that I don't think can come from anywhere else, and especially not God, because God just gives you knowledge, allegedly. How does he do this? Well, I don't know. The cool thing about reason is you can see that you're using it. You can see that you're using your mind to look at facts, form concepts, like, the concept of a cat, using all sorts of particular cats, and then you can form that into higher concepts like, I have cat, dog, fish, animal. Then you have like a bigger concept, right? And then you keep going up higher and higher into higher abstractions and concepts like justice, love, and reason itself. So with all that said, I just wanted to put this on the table and give everybody some, mental chewing gum to work with. Because I think this is kind of a confusing yet vitally important subject that we should all think a little bit about, because this helps us see where the fundamental divide is between a reason-based philosophy and faith-based Christianity. And knowing the difference is important because it's a difference between knowing how to know and just assuming you know something without any evidence for it. And that's what I want to leave you with for today.